So I end up spending a lot of time asking questions to try to probe and see what is it really that you're trying to do. So
Wow.
so yeah, I think
That's
it's
frustrating, right?
yes,
As a
yes,
PC.
definitely.
PC
So
Talks kembali hadir dan kali ini kita akan berbincang-bincang dengan Elsa dari Genesia Ventures. Hai Elsa,
hi,
how
hi.
are you?
Here, I'm good. I'm good. Great
Still
to be.
working from home?
Yes, still working.
Okay. Before we dive into the discussion, maybe you can introduce yourself. What is your position and what is Genesia Venture?
Sure. So I'm Elsha. I am investment manager at Genesia Ventures. So Genesia Ventures is a Japanese fund. So we focus on early stage companies, early stage tech companies in three markets mainly. So that's Japan, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Again, we invest in early stage, so anywhere between pre-seed to pre-Series A, sometimes up to Series A rounds. And our initial ticket size is anywhere between $100,000 to $1 million. Although we are usually more comfortable with anywhere between 100,000 to 500,000. And in terms of the sectors that we look at, we are typically quite agnostic. But in Indonesia, I would say we are not really looking at things like blockchain or um, deep tech at the moment. But yeah, other than that, we are very open.
So there's a lot of startups that already including in your portfolio, right? And it's very random. I mean, Bobox is also one of your portfolio. Is that the kind of startup that you are aiming for, or just like you said earlier, agnostic? What is the category when it comes for you to create the right startup for Genesia Ventures?
Yeah, so again, I think we are actually very agnostic. We
Mm.
cover a lot of different sectors. So, like you mentioned, in our portfolio companies, you can see companies like Logisly and logistics,
Yeah.
Koala in insurance tech, and then we have Bobobox in like travel. And this year, we've invested in two companies called Sinbad, which is a B2B marketplace, and then there is Nectico, which is sort of serving the koperasi segment. So again, it's a really wide range. So for us, we are pretty open. So it's more about whether we think a company is actually solving a real problem country. So
Yes.
I think one thing we definitely focus on though is tech and sort of this idea of digital transformation. So that is the very basic sort of mandate for us. And of course, usually it has to be in the early stage. So we
Oh.
look at like stage and the size of the round,
Mm.
and we look at whether there is a big enough market for the companies. So again, it's a really wide range.
There's a lot of VC in Indonesia is postpone their investment strategy in this year during this pandemic. But on the other hand, there's also a lot of investor that giving their investment money away for the startups in Indonesia. Just like we cover two startups that got money last week.
Hmm.
So do you see there's no chance whatsoever during pandemic when it comes to investment in VC, or do you see some VC that postpone their funding, but other than that, business as usual for VC?
I I would say that I've seen both, but
Oh,
in terms of so the investors that I usually catch up with, I think a lot of them are still doing business as usual, as in they're
yeah,
still new deal flows. So they are still evaluating new investments. It's just that maybe for certain sectors like travel, for example, many
yeah.
investors are taking a bit more time. Maybe they've decided to like sort of delay their investments in that sector. But I would say that many investors are still investing, and I believe we have seen actually some funding news, right, in
Yeah,
a couple of months. Although maybe some of them are actually deals that have closed like maybe much earlier, that are
right.
announced recently.
So the negotiation is earlier
Okay.
before to 2020, right? But the finalization is 2020.
Yes, yes. So I
Okay.
think there are actually a lot of that also, where the discussions started before the pandemic, but then are only finalized in the recent months. Yeah,
Okay,
but
so
I'd say we are
yeah.
still active.
we've already in what the end of the year. We started the pandemic early this year, and I've seen a lot of business is becoming entering the new normal. The traffic is beginning to the crowded like earlier. Do you see that this time of year, end of year, is probably startups will becoming more increased and the funding will be more a lot because the pandemic's still there, but the business is starting to gain their momentum and back to business.
So I think again, so usually I would say in sort of like a normal situation where there's no pandemic, usually toward the end of the year, I've noticed that activities are sort of like going down, I would say, in terms of usually. But
okay.
This year, there are some investors, who could not really deploy their funds in the middle of the year. So, and they actually need to because they can't just be sitting on their funds for like a very long term, right?
Yes.
So what happens is maybe some investors are looking to like deploy before the end of the year. So maybe there could be more activities actually in the next month or two. But again, I mean, for us at Genesia, I think it has been like business as usual. Even during the pandemic, we have actually invested in companies, and hopefully we can close one more before the end of the year.
Okay, looking forward for their update, Elsha. Okay, so you've been doing this for how long now? 1 year, 2 years?
So I've been at Genesia slightly more than 1 year, but actually before this, I was at a fintech company, but before that I was actually at Cyber Agent Ventures, now called Cyber Agent.
Okay, so you've met a lot of founders, Indonesian founders, right? What is the biggest mistake that they keep doing when it comes to fundraising?
So fundraising in general, maybe I'll start out with maybe I'll explain the process a little bit. So what happens is usually if it's an inbound deal, I always request for the deck from the founders first. So I would say that is like the very beginning of like the whole fundraising process, right? So I would say that after I request for the pitch deck, of course I'll be reviewing like tons of them every week. One common mistake that I've seen with the pitch decks that I get is that they're not really getting the message across. Because I think the whole point here of the founders sending us a pitch deck is that they want to really explain what they are planning to do to get the funding, right?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of resources out there now online, so there's no excuse to really creating like a bad pitch deck, I think. So I expect like the very basic things like the problem statement, the solution, the market size, revenue model, attractions, founder's background, things like that. But what happens is sometimes I get pitch decks where I would say 30 to 40% of the content in the very beginning are just describing what's happening in the market without really actually describing the problem itself. So I end up spending a lot of time reading about the market, which I might or might not know about already, but then it's not really getting to the point. So I think it's really important to be concise with the pitch deck. And then the next step in the fundraising process, I guess, would be the face-to-face meeting with the founders. So I think sometimes there is like the same issue where the founders are not really getting to the point, and I end up spending quite a lot of time. Usually I set like an hour for a call. So I end up spending a lot of time asking questions to try to probe and see what is it really that you're trying to do. So yeah, I think
that's frustrating, right?
Yes.
As a PC.
Because I think it's not, I mean, it's wasting everyone's time, right?
Yeah.
We're not really getting to the point here, and the goal is we want to look for great companies and great founders. And I'm sure founders want to get funding, but it's not really helping if you're not getting the message across.
So the best thing that they can do is straight to the point, but with the complete data and research, right? Not just a big explanation, what is our startup, what is the now, but you guys then didn't get the right uh, information
Right.
when it comes to pitch deck. Okay, interesting. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of VCs that having trouble during this pandemic when it comes to pitch deck online, virtual meeting online, because there's a lot of accelerator incubator program and demo day done via Zoom, via Google Meet, and also pitch online. Do you see the pitching via online is not that precise thing to meet startups, or doesn't matter whatsoever? How do you think about that?
For one-on-one meetings, so far
Yeah,
I don't have any issues, to be honest, especially for the first meeting, right? Because
yeah,
content-wise, I think it's the same whether you deliver it in person or you deliver it virtually.
face to face. Yeah,
Right, right. Uh, but I would say usually maybe if we meet in person with the founders, we sort of get to understand maybe their personalities a bit better. But again, I think for us, we have been able to sort of transition to this whole completely virtual process, and we are actually making the investment. So yeah, I think overall there's not too much of an issue. And in terms
okay.
of like pitching events, though,
Mm.
I would say maybe now it's become a lot more structured probably, and there is some sort of flexibility for event organizers, right? Maybe they can pre-record things so that it's smoother in
Right.
transition. Things like that. There's a bit more flexibility as compared
Yeah.
to like a live pitching event. So
Yes.
I think there's like probably like pros and cons to it, but
Yeah.
things have been working really well for everyone, it seems.
But it doesn't matter for Genesia.
Yeah, for Genesia, we
Okay.
are quite flexible.
Last questions. What do you think the startups rise after the pandemic? Do you see e-commerce or logistic or health tech or edutech will be the rising star after the pandemic, or do you see business as usual? As usual? I mean, like fintech and other startups that already established before the pandemic is still growing, even though the pandemic slowing down the business. But after the pandemic, this is as usual, or do you see the startups that rise during this pandemic become bigger?
Good question. I've probably thought about that a couple of times myself.
Right.
I I don't have the answer. To be honest, I can't really predict. I think
Yes.
it's really interesting though to see, like things like edtech really booming, right? And
Yeah.
then SaaS platforms in general, like globally, it's really like booming. Things like
Mm.
Zoom, for example. Um, I would say some of them will probably keep growing even after the pandemic, just because people have formed new habits, right? Like for example, like in the future, maybe I would still, decide to keep a lot of my majority of my meetings virtual or not. I don't know. So that means that platforms like Zoom will keep growing.
Mm.
But say, for example, take education. Maybe I'm less sure of that because, for example, now people are forced to do everything online.
Yes.
But maybe after COVID, there will be some kind of like a more blended approach, right? Maybe both online and offline, or maybe some people just decide that hey, offline is just a better way to go for us because maybe we have really bad connections here.
Yeah.
So I think it really depends
Right.
on the sector.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't think there's like a good answer that covers like everyone, but I would say some would keep growing and then others would really have to find different approaches after the pandemic.
I think it's something that we agree on is Zoom is the platform that will rise, right? Zoom is the winner during and after the pandemic. Okay, Elsha, maybe you can share how the startup founders can introduce, can get to know you guys, and how does it take for them to get noticed from Genesia Ventures?
Sure. So, I mean, in terms of deal flow, I actually get a lot of inbound deals from LinkedIn. So I actually, please feel free to like just email me.
Right.
I leave my email on the profile.
Okay.
So, in terms of how we can get noticed, so I actually review every single one of the
Right.
projects that I get.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
Only the title, next.
No. I review every single one because I know
Okay.
like founders have made the effort to reach out. So
Oh.
to them to also go through every single pitch deck. So
Uh,
again, it's going back to being concise. So if you want to get noticed, like be concise, really sort of. Oh, and of course you have to understand also, I mean, as founders, they have to understand like what our basic mandate is. Like I mentioned, it has to be early stage, and we are sector agnostic, but we don't really look at things like blockchain or deep tech. So if you are in categories that we are not really looking at, I'm of course going to spend less time, and because it's not something we can invest in anyways. But other than that, I think to get noticed, be concise, cover all of the required details like problem, solution, market. There are a lot of templates out there online that founders can look at. So yeah.
Good okay. So thank you very much, Elsha, for your time. Hopefully, our audience can get in touch with you soon, yeah, because let's face it, there's a lot of startups in Indonesia and they need a lot of funds. And hopefully Genesia are actually available. Hopefully Genesia can get more in touch with our startup founders in Indonesia. Thank you for your time, Elsha, and you can go back to work now. Oh. Okay, I'll see you soon, okay?
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.